Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're heading to the Wild West. But not for a showdown with cowboys and outlaws. This is a battle of brains and fossils.
Yeah, we're talking about the Bone Wars, a time in the late 1800s where paleontology got really, really competitive.
Picture it. Dinosaur fossils were just being discovered. The public was going crazy for these giant creatures.
It was like finding out dragons were real, but these dragons had lived millions of years ago.
Right. And in the middle of this dinomania were two guys, Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope.
Yeah, two brilliant paleontologists, but they were also super competitive, almost obsessed with outdoing each other.
I've heard of these guys, Marsh and Cope. Weren't they like the rock stars of the paleontology world back then?
Definitely. They were more like adventurers than your typical scientists, braving harsh conditions, risking their reputations, all to find the most impressive dinosaurs.
Sounds like a recipe for some serious drama.
Mm.
Can you tell us a little more about these guys? What were they like?
Well, Cope was kind of like the impulsive one, energetic, quick to publish his findings. Marsh was more careful, meticulous, a Yale professor with lots of connection.
Ah, so a classic clash of personalities. It sounds like a rivalry waiting to happen.
Yeah.
What exactly triggered this whole bone war thing anyway?
Well, it all started with a big blunder. By Cope,
Oh,
actually.
uh-huh. Tell me more.
He was excavating a site in New Jersey, found a really cool dinosaur, a long-necked marine reptile called Elasmosaurus.
Sounds impressive.
It was, but in his rush to publish, Cope messed up.
You put the head on the tail. Ouch.
That must have been embarrassing.
Oh, it was. And you could bet Marsh jumped all over that mistake.
Yeah.
Totally humiliated Cope in front of everyone.
I guess that's what really kicked off the rivalry.
Yeah, that was the spark. But the pressure to be the best paleontologist, to find the most amazing discoveries, that really fueled the fire. This is starting to sound like an old Western film. Two rivals, battling it out for glory in the Wild West. Did their rivalry stay on the East Coast, or did it move west with the expansion of the United States?
Oh, it definitely went west.
Really? Why?
Well, as the American West was explored, it turned out to be a gold mine for dinosaur fossils.
So Cope and Marsh followed the fossils.
Exactly. They shifted their focus to this new frontier, determined to unearth the best discoveries. And the rivalry, let's just say it got even more intense in the Wild West.
Intense how?
Just imagine vast, dangerous landscapes, unpredictable weather, bandits roaming around. These guys weren't just dealing with scientific challenges, they were facing real dangers out there.
It sounds more like an adventure story than a scientific expedition. I bet they had some run-ins with each other out there, right?
Oh, yeah, and not the friendly kind.
Do tell. What kind of shenanigans were they up to?
We're talking sabotage, spying, bribing people, even destroying fossil sites just to stop the other guy from getting ahead.
They were destroying fossils on purpose.
Wow. It was a paleontological war zone with fossils as the prize, and the Morrison Formation. That was like their main battleground.
The Morrison Formation, why was that so important?
Well, it's this huge geological formation, stretches across a bunch of western states. It's famous for having tons of dinosaur fossils, including some of the most iconic ones we know today.
So it wasn't just a friendly competition for these guys.
Nope, they were ruthless. Like Marsh would actually dynamite fossil sites he'd already excavated just to prevent Cope from finding anything there.
Dynamite. Seriously.
Yeah.
That's wild, but I think that just shows how determined they were to be on top.
It does, but it also raises some big questions about, well, destroying potential scientific discoveries. I mean, how much valuable information was lost because of their rivalry?
It sounds like their feud had a huge impact, not just on their own lives, but on the whole field of paleontology.
For sure. It was like a double-edged sword. Their drive to discover led to a ton of new finds, but their need to one-up each other also led to some rushed and inaccurate research.
It's definitely a complex chapter of the history of paleontology. But before we get into all that, let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the most famous creatures to come out of this era, the tyrant lizard king himself, Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Tyrannosaurus Rex, just the name sends shivers down your spine. I mean, this is the dinosaur that's captivated our imaginations for, what, over 100 years now?
It's true. There's something about T-Rex that just fascinates people. Ever since I was a kid, those jaws, those tiny arms, the sheer size of it. But besides just being cool looking, what makes T-Rex so special in the dinosaur world?
Well, first off, this was the apex predator of its time. It ruled North America during the late Cretaceous period, something like 68 to 66 million years ago, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could challenge it.
Interesting you say that, because when I think of a top predator, I picture things like sharp claws, super speed, not exactly the first things that come to mind when you see a T-Rex skeleton.
You're right, T-Rex wasn't built for speed, probably pretty slow compared to some of those smaller, quicker dinosaurs around back then. But what it lacked in speed, it made up for in power. Pure, raw power.
So it was more of a brute force kind of predator.
Exactly. Those massive legs holding up all that weight could propel it forward with incredible force. And then there were those
Yeah,
jaws.
let's talk about those jaws. That's what always gets me. How powerful was a T-Rex bite anyway?
Imagine trying to crush a bowling ball. With your teeth, that's what T-Rex could do.
You're kidding.
Nope. Studies estimate its bite force at over 12,000 pounds per square inch, enough to pulverize bone. One of the most powerful bites in history, no question.
No wonder nothing messed with a hungry T-Rex.
Right.
But you mentioned its teeth. They're not quite like what I'd picture for a predator, Not those typical sharp, serrated kind.
Right. T-Rex teeth were thick and conical, more like railroad spikes than knives. Not for slicing through flesh, but for crushing, for shattering bones.
So one bite from this thing and you're done for?
Pretty much. Incapacitated in an instant. T-Rex was like the ultimate bone-crushing machine. It's amazing, really. But speaking of its design, we gotta talk about those tiny arms. What was up with those? Purely for show, or did they actually have a use? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Puzzled paleontologists for ages. Those arms were tiny, yeah. Way too small for its body, but also really strong. Some think they might have helped it get up if it fell, or maybe even helped hold on to prey during a fight.
Huh, so maybe they weren't totally useless. Still pretty funny to picture, though. But moving on from those adorable little arms, let's talk about its senses. How did T-Rex hunt? Was it all brute force, or did it have good eyesight, a good sense of smell?
Brute force definitely played a part, but this wasn't just a big dumb brute either. T-Rex had an incredibly developed sense of smell, probably used it to track prey from far away, and its vision was really something too.
What do you mean?
Well, unlike a lot of other dinosaurs, it had forward-facing eyes, like ours, gave it binocular vision, so it could judge distances really accurately.
So it had depth perception, like a built-in rangefinder for hunting.
Exactly. This thing was a finely tuned predator. Powerful, could smell you from miles away, and could judge distances perfectly. Talk about terrifying.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But let's move on from the scary stuff for a sec. There's been talk about T-Rex possibly having feathers. Is there any truth to that?
Now, that is a fascinating area of research. We haven't found feathers directly on a T-Rex fossil yet, but we have found feathered relatives, like Utyrannus, big tyrannosauroid from China. So some scientists think maybe baby T-Rex had some downy feathers.
A baby T-Rex covered in fluff. Okay, that is kind of adorable. Hard to picture it growing up into the giant monster we all know. But it's cool how much we're still learning about these creatures.
Absolutely. Every new discovery changes our understanding of dinosaurs. But let's get back to the bone wars for a minute. All that rivalry, the crazy tactics. How did that whole era shape the way we study dinosaurs today?
Well, the Bone Wars, despite all the bad stuff, they really laid the foundation for modern paleontology. The
Yeah.
sheer number of fossils that came out of that time, it's incredible. And a lot of the iconic dinosaur skeletons we see in museums, discovered back then thanks to that rivalry.
It's amazing to think those museum displays that get kids so excited about dinosaurs, they're a result of this cutthroat competition.
Yeah.
But we can't forget the darker side of it all. Kind of a cautionary tale, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It shows how ambition, taken too far, can really damage science. All that rushing to publish, trying to be famous, even sabotaging each other, it led to mistakes, destroyed fossils, and gave paleontology a bad name for a while. It's a reminder that science should be about more than just personal glory. But before we get too deep into all that, let's talk about another amazing dinosaur from the Bone Wars, Stegosaurus. Now, Stegosaurus, that's a dinosaur that really makes you go, wow. It's like a walking tank from the prehistoric world. Those plates on its back, the spikes on its tail. I wouldn't want to mess with that thing.
Yeah, Stegosaurus was definitely built for defense, roaming around in the late Jurassic about 155 to 150 million years ago, sharing space with some pretty scary predators too, like Allosaurus.
So it needed those defenses.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those plates first. They're the most iconic thing about Stegosaurus, right? But what were they actually for? Just protection or something else?
You know, that's a question that paleontologists are still debating. There are lots of theories floating around. Some think those plates were mainly for defense, like a big shield to make predators think twice.
Yeah, I can see that. And Allosaurus comes charging in, sees those plates, and maybe decides to look for easier prey. But I've also heard they might have been for display or even for controlling body temperature. Any truth to those ideas?
There's actually some evidence for the temperature thing. The plates had a lot of blood vessels running through them, what we call highly vascularized. That suggests they could have helped Stegosaurus absorb or release heat, regulate its temperature.
Like a giant radiator system, soaking up the sun to warm up or
Sure.
letting heat escape to cool down. Pretty clever. But what about the display idea? Could those plates have been used to attract mates or intimidate rivals?
It's definitely possible. The plates were large, they stood out, and who knows, maybe they were brightly colored too. Imagine a Stegosaurus with bright red plates strutting around. Must have been quite a sight.
A Jurassic fashion statement. It's amazing to think that something that looks so simple could have so many uses. But we can't forget about that spiked tail. Now, that had to be purely for defense, right?
Oh, without a doubt. That tail, with those four sharp spikes, was a serious weapon. And there's proof they used it too. We've found Allosaurus bones with puncture wounds that match Stegosaurus tail spikes perfectly.
Ouch. Stegosaurus wasn't messing around. That's like a medieval mace, but on a dinosaur.
But for all its impressive defenses, there's one thing about Stegosaurus that's always puzzled me. It had a brain the size of a walnut.
That's right. Stegosaurus is famous for having one of the smallest brain-to-body ratios we know of. Shows you that intelligence can come in different forms, and you don't always need a big brain to survive.
I guess brute force and a spiky tail go a long way. But it's clear Stegosaurus had what it took to thrive in its environment. It really makes you appreciate the power of evolution. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the wild rivalry of the Bone Wars to the incredible adaptations of dinosaurs like T-Rex and Stegosaurus. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from all this? I think it's a mix of inspiration and caution. The Bone Wars show us how powerful scientific curiosity can be, but also how competition can go too far. It's a reminder to balance that drive to discover with responsibility, with ethics.
I agree. The Bone Wars might be over, but the lessons we learn from them are still important today. As we keep exploring the past, we need to remember to do it with integrity, with respect for the incredible history of our planet. And who knows what other amazing discoveries are waiting for us out there. Every new fossil could change our understanding of the past. It's exciting to think about.
Absolutely. The story of paleontology is still being written, and that's what makes it so captivating.
Well said. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Bone Wars, the rivalries that shaped paleontology, and the amazing creatures that walked the Earth millions of years ago. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop digging for knowledge.